The rain didn't fall. It poured down as if all of Busan were silently weeping. Under the rusty awning of a small laundromat, Park Yun-ha frantically scrubbed an Egyptian silk sheet, the most expensive fabric her rough hands had ever touched. The navy blue ink stain seemed to mock her efforts, expanding like a sentence of failure. "Miss Park." The laundromat manager's shrill voice echoed through the cramped space. "If you can't clean this up by tomorrow, the cost will be deducted from your salary for the next 3 months. Yun-ha swallowed hard. 3 months' salary meant her grandmother's treatment, her brother's school books, the rent for the small apartment in the steep alley of Nampodong. Her fingers, already cracked from constant contact with chemicals, stung under the icy water. Outside the laundry room, the sky had completely darkened, and the other employees had already left. Only she remained, hunched over the sink, with the same silent dignity with which she faced all of life's setbacks. The doorbell jingled. Yun-ha didn't even turn around, imagining it was the manager returning for another round of threats. "So this is where they sent my $5,000 sheet?" The male voice, cold as polished steel, froze her in place. Slowly, she turned and faced the man who occupied the space as if he owned it. The tailored dark gray suit, the watch worth more than 5 years of her salary, the gaze that had never needed to ask permission for anything in his life. "Kang Hyun-jae-si," she murmured, instantly recognizing the face plastered across business magazines and gossip headlines. "Do you have any idea how valuable that fabric is?" He stepped closer, examining the stained sheet without really seeing it. His eyes were fixed on her, a mixture of clinical curiosity and refined disdain. "Machine," translated by Google. The manager came up behind him, panting. "Mr. Kang, we didn't expect your personal visit. Please accept our sincerest apologies. This employee," she pointed at Yun-ha as if indicating a faulty machine, "will be duly punished, and it wasn't my fault." Yun-ha's voice was low but firm. The entire room froze. The manager turned pale. Kang Hyun-jae raised an eyebrow, genuinely surprised. "What?" The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. "The pen was inside the pillowcase," Yun-ha explained, keeping her eyes down, but her voice steady. "When I shook the set, it leaked out. I had no way of predicting that." The silence that followed was piercing. The manager looked like she was about to faint. "Are you telling me it's my fault?" Hyun-jae's tone was somewhere between amused and dangerous. Yun-ha finally lifted her face, meeting his eyes. "I'm telling you it was an accident, and I'm trying to fix it, even though I know it's going to cost me 3 months' salary." Something flickered in his gaze. Maybe surprise, maybe respect, maybe just the pleasure of finding interesting new prey. "Your full name?" he demanded. "Park Yun-ha." He studied her for a moment longer, then removed a card from his inside jacket pocket and slid it across the wet counter. "Tomorrow, 9 o'clock. Don't be late." Before she could respond, he had already turned and left, leaving behind only the expensive scent of his cologne and the crushing weight of uncertainty. The merciless rain continued outside. Yun-ha looked at the card in her trembling hands. Kang Group Tower, Presidential Office. And so, on a rainy Thursday, his life began to fall apart. The lobby of the Kang Group Tower was a monument to power and opulence. Italian marble reflected the natural light that streamed in through the glass panels in the ceiling, creating an almost religious sense of reverence. Yun-ha, in her only formal dress, a navy blue set purchased at a thrift store for her high school graduation, felt like an unwanted blemish on that perfection. Behind the reception counter, 3 receptionists in impeccable uniforms watched her with polite smiles and calculating eyes. Yun-ha swallowed her nervousness and approached. Machine translated by Google. "Good morning. I have an appointment with Mr. Kang Hyun-jae." The smiles faltered. Glances were exchanged. One of the receptionists quickly dialed an internal number, speaking in a low voice. "Your name?" he asked finally. "Park Yun-ha." More whispers on the phone. Then, with evident surprise, "Someone will come and get you, Miss Park." Please wait in the lounge. The lounge was a separate area with Italian leather sofas and low glass tables. Yunha sat on the edge of one of the sofas, aware that every person who passed by was examining her with barely concealed curiosity. Exactly 10 minutes had passed when the executive elevator, the one that didn't stop on intermediate floors, opened, and a woman of approximately 40 years old wearing an impeccable dark red suit walked towards him. Miss Park? I'm Minji, Mr. Kang's executive assistant. Please follow me. The elevator went straight to the 50th floor, the last one without making any stops. The silence was dense, palpable. When the doors opened, Yunha was greeted by a long hallway with dark wooden walls and soft lighting. Minji led her into a huge anteroom where 3 assistants worked at minimalist stations. Without pausing, she walked to the double doors at the back and knocked lightly. Come in. The male voice was unmistakable. Kang Hyun-jae's office took up the entire corner of the building with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Busan. He stood with his back to the door, surveying the city like an emperor, surveying his kingdom. Sir, Miss Park is here, Minji announced, bowing slightly before leaving, closing the door behind her. Yunha stood motionless near the entrance, her heart hammering in her chest. For long seconds, Hyun-jae remained with his back turned, until he finally turned around. In the natural light, her features looked even sharper. Defined jaw, piercing eyes, perfectly coiffed black hair. He eyed her as if evaluating a potential acquisition. You're punctual, he commented, his voice neutral. That's rare. Yunha didn't respond, unsure if it was an observation that required a response. Machine translated by Google. Hyun-jae walked to his desk, an imposing piece of black wood, and gestured to the chair in front. Sit down. She obeyed, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap to hide the trembling. Do you know why you're here? He asked, sitting up and leaning forward slightly. To be fired personally? Her answer came out before she could contain it. Something that might have been a smile brushed his lips, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Interesting, he murmured. Most people are full of excuses and flattery when they're in your position. Yunha felt a blush creep up her neck, but she held her gaze. I don't have time for games, Mr. Kang. I have a sick grandmother waiting for medicine that I won't be able to buy if I lose 3 months' salary over a bedsheet. Hyun-jae studied her for a moment, then opened a drawer and took out a thin folder. I did some research on you, Ms. Park. He opened the folder, revealing what appeared to be a dossier. 26 years old. Graduated with honors in Korean literature from Busan National University. Cares for her grandmother, who has Alzheimer's, and her younger brother, who is a senior in high school. Father missing for 15 years. Mother deceased for 7. Works 2 jobs, at a laundromat and as a private tutor in her spare time. Yunha's blood ran cold. The ease with which he had accessed her private life was frightening. What do you want from me? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hyun-jae closed the folder and stared directly at her, his eyes dark and unreadable. I want you to work for me. The apartment assigned to Yunha was on the 30th floor of a luxury condominium in the Haeundae area, Busan's most exclusive beachfront. When the door opened, she stood frozen in the doorway, unable to believe that she would actually live there. This will be your new address for the duration of the contract, explained Minji, Hyun-jae's assistant, handing him a set of keys. Mr. Kang believes that proximity to the office will increase his productivity. Yunha timidly entered the 120 square meter space. The apartment had ocean views, light wood floors, contemporary furniture, and a kitchen that looked like something out of a home decor magazine. Compared to the tiny 2-room space where she lived with her grandmother and brother, this was a palace. Machine translated by Google. Your things have already been moved to the master bedroom, Minji continued, pointing down a hallway. Your brother and grandmother are being accommodated in an apartment downstairs as requested by Mr. Kang. Yunha turned around abruptly. What? But I didn't. Mr. Kang assumed you wouldn't accept the position without guarantees for your family. Minji interrupted, her tone professional but not without a note of understanding. They're being set up now with a full-time nurse for your grandmother. Involuntary tears welled up in Yunha's eyes. For years, she had struggled to provide even the barest care for her grandmother, always feeling inadequate, always on the verge of financial collapse. And now, why is he doing this? He asked, his voice barely audible. What does he really want from me? Minji looked at her for a moment, something like compassion softening her usually stern features. Mr. Kang doesn't give me explanations for his decisions, but I can tell you that he rarely gets personally involved in hiring. The assistant looked at her watch. There are appropriate clothes in the closet. Tomorrow at 7:30 a.m. a driver will be waiting for you at the entrance to the building. Don't be late. With that, Minji withdrew, leaving Yunha alone with the oppressive luxury and her growing doubts. She walked to the large window in the living room, watching the Busan Sea sparkle in the afternoon sun. 15 years ago, her father had taken her swimming on this very beach before he disappeared without a trace. Now she looked out at it from an apartment that cost more than she would ever earn in a lifetime. The sound of the doorbell pulled her out of her musings. When she opened the door, she found her younger brother, Junho, wide-eyed in shock. "Nuna," he exclaimed, using the Korean term of endearment for older sister. "What's going on?" "There's a nurse with Grandma now, and they moved us to an amazing apartment downstairs." Yunha pulled her brother inside and hugged him tightly. "It's complicated, Junho. I got a new job." "With the Kang Group?" He pulled her away, examining her face. "The nurse said we're here on the CEO's direct orders. Is that true?" She nodded, unable to elaborate further. "But how? Why?" Junho looked simultaneously amazed and worried. "What are you going to do to them?" Machine translated by Google. "I will be Mr. Kang's personal assistant," she replied, repeating the words from the contract she had signed that morning, still not fully understanding what it meant. The new cell phone, also part of the package, vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from an unidentified number. "Dinner, 8 p.m., Kang Paradise Hotel Restaurant. Put on the red dress in the closet. Don't be late. KHJ." Yunha felt a shiver run down her spine. It wasn't an invitation, but an order, like everything related to Kang Hyun-jae. "Nuna, are you okay?" Junho touched her arm, concerned. "You look pale." She forced a smile. "I'm fine, just tired. Go stay with Grandma, will you? I need to get ready for an appointment." After Junho left, Yunha found the aforementioned dress hanging in the huge closet. It was a dark red silk dress, elegant and sophisticated, with a cut that revealed the shoulders in a discreet but powerful way. Beside it was a pair of matching high heels and a velvet box containing a simple set of pearl earrings. Everything calculated, everything controlled, exactly how Kang Hyun-jae approached the world. As she prepared herself, Yunha couldn't help but feel that despite the luxury around her, she had exchanged one prison for another. But unlike the last one, this one had a sea view and smelled of opportunity, the one thing she had never had the privilege of. The Kang Paradise Hotel's restaurant occupied the 45th floor terrace, offering panoramic views of Busan Bay. The area was completely empty, except for a single table in the center, where Kang Hyun-jae waited, gazing at the horizon with a glass of whiskey in his hands. When Yunha approached, he stood up, a gesture of courtesy that seemed mechanical, rehearsed since childhood. "The dress fits perfectly," he observed, his eyes assessing her clinically. "You seem to have a fixation on controlling details," she replied, sitting in the chair a silent waiter pulled out for her. A half-smile brushed Hyun-jae's lips. "That's how I built an empire. And that's how you build relationships, too?" Yunha was surprised by her own boldness. Machine translated by Google. He stared at her for a long moment. "I'm not interested in relationships, Miss Park. I'm interested in efficiency." Without consulting Yunha, Hyun-jae made a subtle gesture, and the waiters began serving dinner, an elaborate sequence of contemporary Korean haute cuisine dishes. "You'll officially start work tomorrow. he explained as he tasted the wine. I need you to understand a few things about me before then. Yunha watched him closely, noticing for the first time small lines of tension around his eyes, almost imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for them. The Kang Group is my life, he continued. I have no hobbies, I have no friends, I have no distractions. I expect the same level of commitment from everyone who works directly with me. Why me? The question escaped her lips. Why choose someone who stained an expensive bedsheet to be your personal assistant? There are hundreds of graduates from elite universities begging for that position. Hyunjae put down his cutlery and stared at her with disturbing intensity. Because you told me no. A heavy silence settled between them. Yunha felt her pulse quicken. My father built this empire with his own hands, he continued, his tone changing subtly, becoming almost vulnerable. Kang Min-ho, the visionary, the man who transformed a small roadside hotel into one of Asia's largest luxury chains. Yunha noticed how her fingers lightly tightened around the crystal glass. He taught me everything about business, about power, about never showing weakness. A bitter smile crossed his face. What he didn't teach me was about life. What happened to him? She asked softly, realizing they were entering delicate territory. He died 10 years ago. Heart attack during a board meeting. Hyunjae spoke as if describing the weather. I was 22 years old and I took full control of the group the next day. I am really sorry. Don't be. He wouldn't want that. Hyunjae took a long sip of whiskey. My mother died when I was 5, cancer. My father never really recovered. He became obsessive. With work, with legacy. Machine translated by Google. Yunha felt an unexpected pang of compassion. It was easier to see Kang Hyunjae as a rich, callous tyrant. Harder to see the motherless boy raised by an emotionally absent father. Love was a distraction for him, Hyunjae continued, his gaze lost in the city lights below. When I turned 10, he gave me my first investment briefcase instead of a party. By 12, I was attending board meetings. By 15, I had closed my first acquisition. There was no childhood, Yunha murmured, almost to herself, his eyes fixed on hers, piercing. I had the privilege of being trained by the best. Privilege is an interesting word for it, she noted. A heavy silence fell. Hyunjae watched her as if trying to decipher a particularly complex puzzle. There was a woman, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 years ago, she worked in the group's legal department. Yunha remained quiet, feeling that they were getting to the heart of the story. Her name was Seo Yeon. I thought it was different. His face hardened. I later found out that she was passing confidential information to our competitors, using our inner proximity to access data that shouldn't be accessed. The weight of betrayal hung heavily on his words. What happened to her? Yunha asked, her voice soft. Nothing that money couldn't solve. Hyunjae took another sip of whiskey. She is living comfortably somewhere in Europe as long as she never sets foot in Korea or mentions the name Kang again. Yunha realized what he wasn't saying, that his betrayal had solidified her father's lessons, that trusting was a risk he couldn't afford to take. Is that why you hired me? She asked. Why do you think someone with no connections, no elite background would be less likely to betray you? His eyes met hers with a disturbing intensity. I hired you, Miss Park, because when I looked into your eyes in that laundromat, I saw something I rarely encounter. Dignity that is not for sale. Yunha felt her heart race, unsure if that was a compliment or a veiled threat. Everyone has a price, he continued. I'm curious to find out yours. Machine translated by Google. The first week as Kang Hyunjae's personal assistant had been a whirlwind. Yunha had barely had time to breathe between meetings, international phone calls, and the avalanche of documents she had to organize and summarize for him every day. Her life had become a sequence of tasks carried out with military precision, under the watchful and critical eye of her new boss. That Friday at 10:37 p.m., she was still in the presidential office, finalizing reports for an important morning meeting. Hyunjae had gone out to dinner with Chinese investors, leaving her with meticulous instructions on what should be ready by his return. The sound of the private elevator interrupted his concentration. Moments later, the office door opened and Hyun-jae walked in, loosening his tie slightly, a rare gesture that signaled fatigue. "Still here," he observed, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "The feasibility report for the Jeju project needed adjustments," she replied. Not looking up from the screen, Hyun-jae walked to the inconspicuous bar in the corner of the room and poured himself a finger of whiskey. To Yunha's surprise, he poured another glass and placed it on the table next to her. "You're efficient," he commented, watching her over the rim of his glass. "More than I expected." Yunha finally looked at him. "Thank you, I guess." "It's not a compliment, it's an observation." He sat in the chair across from her desk. "In 1 week, you've reorganized my schedule, identified 3 redundancies in contracts our legal team had approved, and managed to impress the Japanese ambassador with your knowledge of formal etiquette." Yunha remained silent, uncertain as to where he was going with this. "I'm wasting your talent," Hyun-jae concluded, his eyes fixed on hers. A small tremor ran down Yunha's spine. "Are you firing me?" A half smile touched his lips. "I'm promoting you. Or rather, I'm redefining your role." He stood up and walked to the window, gazing out at the night city for a moment before turning back to her. "Kang Group is about to acquire the Blue Ocean Hotels chain. It is a strategic purchase that will give us a presence in the European and North American markets." His voice took on the clinical tone she had learned to associate with major business decisions. "To finalize the deal, I will need to spend 3 months traveling between Paris, London, and New York." Machine translated by Google. Yunha nodded, uncertain how this affected her position. "I want you to join me," he continued. "Not just as an assistant, but as part of the negotiating team." She blinked, confused. "But I have no business background or experience in international acquisitions." "You have something more valuable." Hyun-jae approached, stopping less than a meter away from her. "He has an instinct for people. He notices things my Harvard-trained analysts don't see." The praise was unexpected and disarmed Yunha momentarily. "However," he continued, his tone now carefully neutral, "this will require a new agreement between us." She felt her stomach tighten. She knew there was something more. Hyun-jae pulled a thin document from his briefcase and slid it across the table. "A new contract. I'll triple your current salary. You'll have access to my private account for travel-related expenses, an unlimited corporate card, and a 1% share of the profits from the acquisition if it's successful." Yunha felt her head spin at the numbers he casually mentioned. 1% of $1 billion acquisition could mean, "And what do you expect in return?" he asked, his voice firmer than he felt inside. Hyun-jae's eyes became intense, almost predatory. "Absolute loyalty, 24-hour availability, and—" He paused, examining her carefully before continuing. "I will need you to play a specific role during these trips." Yunha felt her heart race. "What role?" "My fiancé's." The silence that followed was heavy, filled with tension. Yunha tried to keep her expression neutral even though her pulse was racing. "Why?" he finally managed to ask. Hyun-jae gave a small smile as if he had expected exactly that question. "Because the Delacroix family, Blue Ocean's main shareholder, are traditionalists. They value family stability and long-term commitments. A single CEO in his early 30s doesn't convey the image of stability they seek in a business partner." Machine translated by Google. Yunha stared at the contract on the table, her mind racing to process what it proposed. "You want me to lie?" "I want you to act," he corrected, his voice soft but firm. "Consider a temporary extension of your current duties." "What if I refuse?" Hyun-jae studied her for a moment, something like respect shining in his eyes. "Then you will remain as my personal assistant, with all the current perks, including the apartment and care for your family. There is no threat here, Miss Park. Just one chance." Yunha looked at the contract again. The proposed salary could pay for her grandmother's full treatment and secure an elite university for her brother. With the profit share, she could finally have real financial security. "How long would this act last?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. 3 months. Possibly 4, if negotiations continue. Hyunjae sat on the edge of the table, next to her. "There will be no physical intimacy involved, if that's what concerns you. Just public appearances, business dinners, and the appropriate image." Yunha looked up, meeting his eyes. "You don't seem like the kind of man who needs to invent brides to impress business partners." Something changed in his expression, a momentary vulnerability, quickly masked. "I create the tools I need for every situation," he replied, his voice neutral again. "You are the tool I need right now." The calculated coldness of that sentence should have offended her, but Yunha understood what he wasn't saying, that somehow she had become valuable to him. Not as a person, perhaps, but as an asset in his corporate chess game. "And when it's all over?" she asked. "You will have the choice to continue with the Kang Group in an executive position commensurate with your new experience, or to receive a substantial severance package to start your own business, whichever you prefer." Yunha closed her eyes for a moment, weighing her options. What she was considering was an elaborate farce, a sophisticated lie. Yet somewhere deep down, she knew that this might be the only chance she would have to change the course of her and her family's fate. Machine translated by Google. Slowly, she reached out for the pen. "We have a deal, Mr. Kang." Something flashed in his eyes. Satisfaction? Relief, when she signed the contract. "We're leaving. For Paris in 3 days," he announced, standing up. "Minji will coordinate the necessary preparations. Clothing, jewelry, documents. You'll receive intensive training in international protocol and business etiquette in the meantime." He took the signed contract and put it in the folder. "One last thing," he added, his tone almost casual. "From now on, when we're in public or with anyone on the team, you're to call me Hyunjae, not Mr. Kang. A bride wouldn't be so formal." Hyunha swallowed hard, the reality of her new role beginning to set in. "Yes, Hyunjae," he replied, the name strange on his tongue. He nodded, satisfied, and walked toward the exit. At the door, he stopped. "You didn't ask me why I chose you, specifically for this role," he observed without turning around. Yunha hesitated. "I guess it's because I don't have any social connections that could expose your charade." Hyunjae turned partially, his profile silhouetted against the door. "It's because when I looked into your eyes in that laundromat, I saw something rare, dignity that has no price tag." A brief pause. Ironic that that's exactly what I'm buying now. And with that, he left, leaving Yunha alone with the untouched glass of whiskey and the weight of a decision that would completely transform her life. Words in this chapter. 698. Chapter 6. Her Transformation. Paris was glowing in the spring sunshine as Yunha looked out the window of her room in the presidential suite of the George V Hotel. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival in the Siwi, City of Lights, and she barely recognized the woman who now gazed at her reflection in the full-length Venetian mirror. The navy tweed Chanel dress hugged her figure with understated elegance, an ensemble handpicked by the personal stylist Hyunjae had hired. Her hair, once always pulled back in a practical ponytail, now fell in soft, glossy waves to her shoulders, cut and styled in the finest Parisian salons. Machine translated by Google around her neck, a delicate pearl necklace, an official engagement gift, chosen to appear both valuable and sentimental in the eyes of the Delacroix family. "Mademoiselle Park, are you ready?" asked the French assistant assigned to assist her, entering the room after a light knock. "Oui, Sophie, merci," Yunha replied, surprised at how fluent she had become in such a short time. Intensive classes in French, European etiquette, and art history, all organized by Hyunjae, had transformed not only her appearance, but her poise. Sometimes, when chatting with international executives or Parisian socialites at official events, Yunha wondered who the articulate, confident woman who had taken her place really was. A firmer knock sounded on the suite's front door. Sophie ran to answer it. Monsieur Kang is there, he announced, returning quickly. Yunha took a deep breath, applied a final coat of lipstick, and walked into the main room of the suite. Hyunjae was standing by the window, gazing at the view of the Eiffel Tower. When he saw her, he paused for an almost imperceptible moment, something flashing in his normally impassive gaze. "You look adequate," he commented, always economical, with direct praise. But Yunha had learned to read between the lines. The way his eyes roamed over her, the subtle adjustment in his posture, she knew he was impressed. "The dress is perfect for lunch with Madame Delacroix," she observed, picking up the small Hermès bag that matched the ensemble. "Traditional, but not old-fashioned. Exactly what we need to communicate today." Hyunjae nodded, his eyes still on her. "Your understanding of the Delacroix psychology has been valuable." Over the past few weeks, Yunha had become an integral part of the negotiations. What had started as a mere act had turned into a real strategic partnership. She noticed social nuances that Hyunjae missed, while he mastered the financial aspects with mastery. Together, they were gradually gaining the trust of the Delacroix family. In the private elevator, going down to the lobby where the driver was waiting for them, Hyunjae slightly adjusted his tie, a gesture that Yunha recognized as a sign of nervousness, something very rare for him. "Lunch today is crucial," he commented, not looking at her directly. "If we impress Madame Delacroix, the rest of the council will follow her lead." Machine translated by Google. Instinctively, Yunha touched his arm in a gesture of reassurance. Hyunjae looked at her hand, surprised by the contact, but did not pull away. "The matriarch values authenticity above all else," Yunha recalled. "That's why I asked to alter our gift. Expensive jewelry might seem like an attempt to buy her off." Instead of the baccarat crystal vase initially chosen by the corporate relations team, Yunha had suggested a traditional Korean tea set made by the last master potter in an ancient Busan lineage, something that told a story, not just displayed financial power. The car glided smoothly through the elegant streets of Paris's 8th arrondissement. Beside him, Hyunjae mentally reviewed the points of the negotiation, his profile set against the window. Yunha watched him discreetly. The man who had hired her as a pawn in his power play had, without realizing it, begun to genuinely trust her judgment. "You look different," he commented suddenly, turning to face her. "It's the hair," she replied, trying a slight smile. "Or maybe the designer wardrobe." "No," Hyunjae denied, his eyes piercing. "It's something more fundamental." Yunha held his gaze. "Maybe it's confidence or the feeling of finally having some control over my destiny." For a moment, something vulnerable crossed his face, an expression Yunha had never seen before. But it quickly disappeared as the car pulled up in front of the discreet restaurant where Madame Delacroix was waiting for them. Before they left, Hyunjae lightly grabbed his arm. "You're transformed," he said, his voice low, almost intimate. "But I hope you haven't lost what made you unique." Yunha felt an inexplicable chill run down her spine. "And what would that be?" "Your dignity," he replied simply. "The same one I saw in that laundromat in Busan." The maitre d' opened the car door, breaking the moment. Hyunjae instantly reassumed his confident CEO mask, offering his arm to Yunha with the practiced elegance of a man accustomed to commanding any room. As she walked into the restaurant beside him, playing the part of the devoted bride to perfection, Yunha realized a disturbing truth. The girl from the dry cleaners had disappeared, giving way to a woman who navigated this new world of power and privilege with surprising ease. Machine translated by Google. The transformation wasn't just in the expensive dresses or elegant hairstyles, it was in the way she now moved through the world, with the certainty of someone who had finally found her place. And most disturbingly, she was starting to enjoy it. "Mr. Kang and his fiancée have arrived. They are waiting at the reception." Yunha felt her heart race as she heard the secretary announce her presence. 2 months had passed since she had left Korea, and now, finally, she was back in Busan. No, longer as an anonymous employee at a laundromat, but as the fiancé of the most powerful man in the city. The office where they waited belonged to Yumi, the former manager of the laundromat, now the regional director of the luxury laundromat chain, recently acquired by the Kang Group, a coincidence that Yunha knew was Hyun-jae's calculated work. "Remember," he murmured beside her, "you don't have to say anything. Your presence here is message enough." Yunha smoothed the skirt of her elegant teal Dior ensemble, feeling the weight of the engagement ring, a discreet, but undeniably valuable 5-carat solitaire on her finger. The charade of their engagement, originally planned only for negotiations in Europe, had been extended when they returned to Korea under the guise of public consistency. The door opened, and Yumi walked in, her face a mask of servility that barely concealed the shock at recognizing Yunha. "Mr. Kang, what an unexpected honor to welcome you to our humble branch." Yumi bowed deeply, ostentatiously ignoring Yunha. "If we had known of your visit, we would have prepared an appropriate reception." Hyun-jae remained impassive. "Miss Ji, I believe you know my fiancé, Park Yunha." Yumi's eyes widened, and she finally faced Yunha, scanning her from head to toe with barely concealed disbelief. "P. Park Yunha? The former employee?" She stuttered, unable to complete the sentence. "The same," Yunha confirmed, her voice calm and controlled without a trace of the fearful girl she once was. "It's good to see you again, Miss Ji." Yumi paled visibly, surely mentally replaying every moment of humiliation and verbal abuse she had inflicted on Yunha during the years she had been her superior. "We've come to personally inspect the operations," Hyun-jae continued, his tone coolly professional. "Yunha has valuable insights into how to improve efficiency and employee treatment based on her direct experience." Machine translated. By Google, Yumi's face alternated between white and red. "Oh, of course, Mr. Kang, we are available for any sea changes you deem necessary." The meeting that followed was a calculated show of power. While Hyun-jae reviewed numbers and processes with surgical precision, Yunha offered articulate suggestions about working conditions, adequate breaks, and living wages, each word a small revenge against years of exploitation. When they were done, Yumi looked completely disarmed, her arrogance replaced by a subservience bordering on panic. "One more thing," Yunha said as they stood to leave. "That navy blue ink-stained sheet. Do you remember it?" Yumi swallowed. "Yes, of course." "It was an accident caused by the hotel's negligence, not mine." Yunha smiled softly. "You have deducted 3 months of my salary for this. I would like this amount, with appropriate interest, to be donated to the Laundry Workers Medical Aid Fund." "Immediately, Miss Park," Yumi replied, her voice barely audible. As they walked out to the parking lot where the driver waited with the limousine door open, Hyun-jae looked at Yunha with something that seemed like admiration. "No screaming, no accusations, no tears," he commented, helping her into the car. "Just elegance and dignity." "I learned from the best," she replied, holding his gaze. The car glided silently through the streets of Busan. The next stop was more personal, his younger brother Jun-ho's graduation from the prestigious international college, where he had transferred months ago thanks to Hyun-jae's intervention. At the ceremony, sitting in the front row next to him, Yunha watched as her brother received the award for Best Student in Science, wearing the elegant uniform she could never have afforded in her previous life. In the audience, several of her former classmates and neighbors watched her with barely concealed astonishment, whispering to each other, some waving shyly, others pretending not to recognize her. "Are you feeling what I imagine you are?" Hyun-jae asked quietly, noticing his gaze sweep over the crowd. "It's not revenge," she replied honestly. "It's validation. Not just for me, but for my brother, who always deserved more than the world was willing to give him." Something softened in Hyun-jae's gaze. "You could choose to humiliate them if you wanted. You would have that power now." Yunha shook her head. "That would make me just like them." Machine translated by Google. After the ceremony, during the reception, several people approached her, former superiors, neighbors who had never really noticed her existence, even the landlady of the small apartment they were renting, who was famous for never fixing the broken heater in the winter. "Park Yun-ha, how wonderful to see you," exclaimed Mrs. Choi, a neighbor who often complained about the noise when Yun-ha came home late from work. "I always knew you were special." Instead of confronting her, Yun-ha smiled politely, introducing her to Hyun-jae with the same courtesy she would extend to any stranger. "This is Mrs. Choi, an old neighbor," he said simply. "Mrs. Choi, this is Kang Hyun-jae." There was no need to explain who he was. All of Busan knew his name and face. The woman paled, giving an exaggerated, awkward bow. "Since you've known each other for so long," Hyun-jae commented with mock casualness, "perhaps Ms. Choi could be invited to our charity event next month. We'll be raising funds to improve housing conditions in low-income areas." The woman's forced smile faltered momentarily. It would be an honor." When they finally left the reception, Yun-ha felt strangely light. The confrontation she had, so feared, had turned out not to be an airing of past hurts, but a silent affirmation of her new reality. "You were classy," Hyun-jae observed when they were back in the car. "You could have humiliated them, but you chose not to." Eun-ha looked out the window, watching the familiar buildings from her old life pass by like a movie and rewind. "I realized something today," she replied, her voice soft. "My greatest revenge is not to make them feel small, but to show them that I have always been greater than they imagined." Hyun-jae studied her for a long moment, something indefinable shining in his usually impenetrable eyes. "That's why you're different," he said finally. "You understand that true power lies not in destroying, but in transcending." When their gazes met, something imperceptibly changed between them. No longer just a business agreement, but a mutual understanding that no contract could capture. Snow fell gently over New York, transforming Central Park into a fairy tale setting visible from the penthouse where Yun-ha was staying. 4 months had passed since machine translated by Google. It had been a while since the start of the agreement. With Hyun-jae, and the acquisition of the Blue Ocean Hotels chain was about to be finalized. What had started as a performance had evolved into a real partnership. Yun-ha now led the cultural integration team, responsible for aligning the two companies' corporate policies. It was Christmas Eve, and for the first time in years she wasn't working. Her brother and grandmother had been flown to New York for the holidays, staying in an adjacent suite. Her grandmother's condition had improved significantly with specialized treatment, and Jun-ho had just received his acceptance letter to Harvard for the following fall. Yun-ha adjusted the dark green velvet dress she would wear for dinner that night, an intimate event Hyun-jae had organized just for them and their family. It was the first Christmas for him in over 20 years that wouldn't be spent in a boardroom or on intercontinental flights. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Upon opening it, he found Hyun-jae standing in the hallway, holding a small package wrapped in silver paper. "May I come in?" he asked, an unusual hesitation in his voice. Yun-ha nodded, noticing that he wasn't wearing his usual formal suit, but a black cashmere shirt and dress pants, an almost relaxed version of the always impeccable CEO. "Are Jun-ho and his grandmother getting ready?" he asked, entering the elegant space. "Yes. The experimental treatment is working wonderfully," Yun-ha replied, feeling gratitude tighten in her throat. She recognized Jun-ho today, for the first time in months. Hyun-jae nodded, his face softening almost imperceptibly. "Doctors say the progress has been remarkable." A comfortable silence settled between them, no longer the tension of the early days, but a familiarity built over months of working closely, of shared challenges, of secrets gradually revealed over long nights in distant hotels. "I brought you something," he said finally, holding out the small package. "I'd prefer you open it in private." Yun-ha accepted the box, surprised by the gesture. In all the months they had worked together, Hyun-jae had never given her a personal. First, everything had always been professional, strategic, part of the act. Carefully, she unwrapped the paper, revealing a small carved wooden box. Upon opening it, he found an antique silver brooch. delicately crafted in the shape of a cherry blossom. Machine, translated by Google. It was my mother's, Hyunjae explained, his voice softer than Yunha had ever heard it. The only personal item of hers that my father kept after her death. Yunha felt the weight of the meaning of that gesture. Hyunjae, I can't accept something so personal. You can, he insisted, stepping forward, because you understand the value of things that cannot be bought. Their eyes met, and Yunha felt something shift in the air between them, a different tension, fraught with unspoken possibilities. I received Delacroix's final offer today, Hyunjae commented, looking away slightly. The agreement will be signed next week. That's wonderful, she replied, trying to ignore the twinge of apprehension she felt. The end of the agreement also meant the end of their engagement charade. You got what you wanted. We did it, he corrected. Without you, this wouldn't have happened. Hyunjae walked to the window, looking out at the snow-covered city. Remember our original contract? He asked without turning around. You had to choose an executive position in the Kang Group or a severance package to start your own business. Yunha felt her heart sink. This was it. The moment she had always known would come. I remember, he replied simply. Hyunjae turned to face her, his eyes intense. I want to propose a third option. He took a step towards her, closing the distance between them. I never believed in fairy tales, Yunha. I was raised to see people as pieces on a board, as means to an end. When I proposed our deal, you were just another strategy. Yunha felt a blush creep up her neck, unsure of where he was going with this. But something happened in those months, he continued, his voice low. Something that wasn't in the contract, that wasn't planned or calculated. He gently touched the brooch she still held. I began to see the world through his eyes, to value things I never considered important, to question everything I had been taught about power and success. Yunha could barely breathe, feeling the weight of those words. Machine translated by Google. What are you trying to say, Hyunjae? He took another step, now so close that she could feel the heat of his body. I'm saying I don't want our deal to end, he replied. I don't want this ring to be just a piece of corporate theater. With a smooth movement, he took her hands in his. Park Yunha, the girl at the laundromat who had the courage to challenge me. The woman who transformed not only herself, but me as well. His voice cracked slightly. I want it to be real. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Yunha felt involuntary tears form in her eyes. You don't know what you're saying, he muttered. We're from completely different worlds. We were, he corrected. Now we create our own world together. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Hyunjae leaned in, his lips meeting hers in a kiss as soft as it was inevitable. It wasn't the calculated kiss they'd staged at social events to keep up appearances. It was real, vulnerable, revealing. When they parted, Yunha saw something she had never seen before in his eyes. Uncertainty. I'm used to closing billion-dollar deals without hesitation, he said with a self-deprecating smile. But here I am, trembling as I ask you to make real what started as a farce. Yunha touched his face, feeling the stubble beneath her fingers. How can I be sure this isn't just another contract for you? His eyes met hers, more open and vulnerable than they had ever been. Because for the first time in my life I have no backup plans, no escape clauses, no negotiable terms, he replied. I only have the truth. I have fallen in love with you, Park Yun-ha. And that terrifies me more than any stock market crash ever could. Spring was blooming in Seoul as Yun-ha placed the last folder inside the box. Her office on the 48th floor of Kang Tower was nearly empty now, stripped of the little personal touches that had made it her space for the past 6 months. Since that Christmas Eve in New York, everything and nothing had changed. The fake engagement had become real, but kept a discreet secret from the corporate world. Hyunjae remained the ruthless CEO of the Kang Group, while Yunha took over machine translated by Google officially the position of Director of Cultural Integration, overseeing the merger with Blue Ocean Hotels. The project had been successfully completed 2 weeks earlier, much faster than expected. And now, Yunha was about to embark on a journey she never imagined possible. The door opened and Hyunjae walked in, his eyes immediately taking in the stacked boxes and empty office. "Then it's official," he commented, his voice neutral, but his eyes betraying the restrained emotion. "The flight leaves tomorrow at 10 a.m., Yunha confirmed, placing the last plant in a smaller box. Junho is already at Harvard preparing for the semester. Grandma is comfortably settled in the new house with the nursing staff. Everything is ready." Hyunjae walked to the window, looking out at the Seoul skyline as he had done so many times in his own office. "Columbia is an excellent university," he commented, his back still to her. "The master's program in comparative literature is one of the best in the world." 2 years will pass faster than we think," Yunha replied softly, approaching him. Hyunjae turned around, finally facing her. "I could have bought an entire university here in Korea if you wanted." A soft smile touched her lips. "And that's exactly why I need to go." He frowned in confusion. Yunha placed her hand over his, a gesture that had become second nature over the months. "Hyunjae, when we first met, I was a desperate girl washing sheets at a laundromat. You gave me a world I never dreamed of reaching. You transformed my life. And you transformed mine," he replied, lacing his fingers through hers. "Exactly," Yunha agreed. "And now I need to figure out who I am when I'm not in your shadow. I need to achieve something on my own, without the power of the Kang name opening every door." Hyunjae looked down for a moment, processing her words. When he looked back at her, there was a new understanding in his eyes. "You want to be more than Kang Hyunjae's bride," he stated. "I want to be worthy of being by your side," she corrected. "Not as a debt of gratitude or a contract that has evolved, but as a woman who has made her own path." Machine translated by Google. A silence fell between them, filled only by the distant sound of the city below. "God, I hate you sometimes," Hyunjae finally muttered, a reluctant smile tugging at his lips. "You've always been wiser than me." Yunha smiled, feeling the tightness in her chest. "Not wiser, just different. That's why we work well together." Hyunjae let go of her hand and walked to the table, opening the folder he had brought with him. "I was going to wait until dinner tonight, but I think now is the right time." He extracted a document and handed it to her. "Your scholarship is completely guaranteed, regardless of what happens between us." Yunha flipped through the document in surprise. "You created a foundation in my name? The Park Foundation, to support literature students from disadvantaged backgrounds," he confirmed. "Completely independent of the Kang Group, with its own board and perpetual funding. You will be honorary president if you accept, but you can run it remotely while you are studying." Tears welled up in Yunha's eyes. It was the perfect gift. Not a piece of jewelry or a fancy car, but the chance to create for others the opportunities she herself had never had. "You know me too well," she whispered. "I'm learning," he replied seriously, "and I will continue to learn, even with an ocean between us." Yunha placed the document on the table and approached him, touching his face. 2 years, he promised. 2 wings of the same bird, flying in different directions only to gain strength before reuniting again. Hyunjae pulled her close, hugging her with an intensity that revealed everything his restrained words did not express. "I'll be in New York every 3 weeks, he murmured against her hair. "I have a private jet after all." Yunha laughed softly against his chest. "And I'll come to Seoul for the holidays, and we'll talk every day." "Every night," he corrected. "I want to be the last voice you hear before you fall asleep." They pulled away just enough to look at each other. Hyunjae took a small box out of his inner jacket pocket. "This isn't goodbye," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate platinum ring with tiny blue sapphires. "It's a promise." Machine translated by Google. "But we already have an engagement ring," Yunha noted, confused, looking at the diamond solitaire on her left hand, the same one that had started as a part of the act. That one was for the world, Yunjai explained. This is just for us. To remember that no matter the distance, what we have is real. He slid the ring onto her middle finger next to her engagement finger. Blue is the stained sheet that brought us together, he commented with a rare flash of humor. Seems fitting. Yunha laughed through her tears. Unconventional, like our story. When they kissed, there was no longer the desperate ardor of other moments, but a silent promise, of waiting, of growth, of reunion. I'll miss you every day, he whispered against her lips. And I will miss yours, Yunha replied. But when we meet again, I will be a woman who chose her own path, not just the one you saved. Hyunjae watched her with a mixture of pride and melancholy. You never needed saving, Park Yunha. You just needed an open door. The rest you earned on your own. The next day, as her plane took off from Incheon International Airport, Yunha looked out the window, watching Seoul gradually shrink beneath the clouds. On her lap was a battered copy of classic Korean poems she had taken from the dry cleaners, the only object she had kept from her previous life. On the back cover was a newly written dedication in Hyunjae's precise handwriting. To the woman who taught me that true power lies not in possessing, but in releasing. I will be here when you return, not as an owner, but as a partner on your journey. Love, KHJ. 2 years later, the auditorium at Seoul National University was packed for the International Conference on Contemporary East Asian Literature. As the keynote speaker, Park Yun-ha discreetly adjusted her microphone as she surveyed the diverse audience of academics, students, and literary enthusiasts. Her hair, now cropped to shoulder length, framed a face that exuded quiet confidence. Her simple yet elegant teal suit was complemented only by 2 rings, the diamond solitaire on her left hand and the delicate sapphire band on her middle finger that had never left its place in the past 2 years. Literature does not exist in a vacuum, she concluded her talk, after an hour of engaging analysis of the evolution of modern Korean novels. It is, above all, a machine translated by Google reflection of the society that produces it, and a vehicle for voices that would otherwise remain silenced. Thank you very much. The auditorium erupted in applause. At the back of the room, Min-ji, Hyun-jae's former assistant and now executive vice president of the Kang Group, smiled discreetly at her. Beside her, Junho, now a young adult in his final year of chemistry at Harvard, applauded with unabashed enthusiasm. After answering a few questions from the audience, Yun-ha was led to an adjacent room for the autograph session. Her book, Voices Between Worlds, Narratives of Class in Contemporary Korean Literature, had been published 3 months earlier and quickly became an academic bestseller, translated into 7 languages. That was an excellent presentation, Dr. Park, the head of the literature department, commented, using his newly acquired title with obvious respect. Our offer to join our faculty remains open. Yun-ha smiled gratefully. It's an honor, Professor Kim. I promise to give it serious consideration. As the line of readers moved forward, she noticed familiar faces, former laundromat colleagues, neighbors from the alley where she lived, even Mrs. Choi, who now treated her with almost reverential respect. Yun-ha received them all with the same gentle courtesy, without a trace of resentment or superiority. As the last book was signed and the room began to empty, Min-ji approached, discreetly checking her watch. You have exactly 20 minutes to freshen up before the event at the foundation, she informed him, efficient as ever. The car is waiting. Yun-ha nodded, gathering up her notes. Did Hyunjae RSVP? An enigmatic smile touched Min-ji's lips. Mr. Kang asked me to inform you that he will be there in person. Over the past 2 years, their paths had crossed regularly. Hyunjae keeping his promise to visit New York every 3 weeks, Yun-ha returning to Seoul during holidays and academic breaks. They had kept their relationship out of the spotlight, protecting the privacy they both valued so much, while Eun-ha completed her master's degree and wrote her book. The world only knew that the powerful CEO of the Kang Group was still officially engaged to the mysterious Park Yun-ha, who now had a PhD in comparative literature from Columbia and ran a respected educational foundation. The Park Foundation's headquarters occupied a restored historic building in central Seoul. When Yun-ha arrived, the inner courtyard was already lit up for the evening event, the graduation of the first class of scholarship recipients, 20 young people from humble backgrounds who had received full support to complete their higher education. Machine translated by Google. As she walked through the hallways decorated with contemporary Korean art, Yun-ha couldn't help but think of the poetic symmetry of her journey. 2 years ago, she had worried that distance might weaken her bond with Hyun-jae. Instead, it had strengthened what they had, each reunion deeper, each separation more meaningful, each individual achievement celebrated as a shared victory. Entering the grand hall where the scholarship recipients and their families gathered, Yun-ha was immediately surrounded by enthusiastic young people, many of whom had become almost like family over the past 2 years. She greeted them warmly, genuinely proud of their accomplishments. It was then that she felt a change in the atmosphere of the room, that sudden silence that always accompanied Kang Hyun-jae's entrance into any room. Turning slowly, she saw him standing in the doorway, impeccable in his dark suit, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that not even 2 years of relationship had diminished. He was not alone. Beside him in a sleek modern wheelchair was Yun-ha's grandmother, visibly healthier than she had been during the difficult years, her face lit up with a serene smile. And next to them was a figure who made Yun-ha's heart freeze momentarily. It was Song Min-ho, her father, the man who had disappeared 15 years ago when she was just a girl. Yun-ha felt the world spin around her. With hesitant steps, she approached the group, her eyes fixed on the aged but unmistakable figure of her father. "Appa," he whispered, the Korean word for father escaping his lips like a prayer. The man smiled shyly, tears shining in his eyes. "Yun-ha, my daughter." Before she could process what was happening, Yun-ha felt his arms wrap around her in a desperate hug. Automatically, her own arms hugged him back, her body remembering what her mind could barely believe. When they finally pulled away, she met Hyun-jae's gaze, filled with pent-up emotion. "How?" he asked simply. "He was in Australia," Hyun-jae explained, his voice low so only she could hear. "After reporting irregularities at my father's company, he was persuaded to disappear, with the promise that his family would be protected." Understanding began to form in Yun-ha's mind, pieces of a puzzle she had never imagined existed. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Machine translated by Google. Hyun-jae shook his head. "I found out 6 months ago when I was reviewing my father's secret files during the restructuring of the real estate division. I immediately sent a team to find him." Yun-ha's father held her trembling hands. "I wanted to come back many times," he explained, his voice cracking. "But I was afraid of the consequences for you and Junho. When the son of the man who drove me away showed up in person to bring me back, I couldn't have imagined it in my wildest dreams." Yun-ha looked between the two men, feeling the weight of history, of coincidences, of fate that had intertwined their lives in ways no novelist would dare imagine. "Why didn't you tell me?" Hyun-jae asked. "I wanted to be sure," he replied. "And I wanted this moment to be perfect." As if in response, the lights in the hall dimmed slightly, and a murmur of anticipation ran through the crowd. Hyun-jae made a subtle gesture, and the foundation scholarship recipients formed a semicircle, each holding a small lantern. "What's going on?" Yun-ha asked, bewildered. Hyun-jae stepped forward, taking her hands in his. "Park Yun-ha," he began, his voice surprisingly vulnerable for a man accustomed to running corporate empires. 2 years ago, when you left to forge your own path, you promised me that you would return not as someone I saved, but as a woman who had chosen her own destiny." He paused, his eyes roving over her face with almost palpable reverence. "You have delivered on that promise in ways I never knew were possible. Not only have you carved out a niche for yourself in academia, not only have you written an acclaimed book, Not only have you transformed the lives of dozens of young people through your foundation, you have transformed me too by teaching me what no business school ever could: how to love without possessing. Silent tears began to stream down Yunha's face as the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. Our engagement started as a contract, Hyunjae continued, a soft smile touching his lips. I want to end it today. A confused murmur ran through the audience, but Yunha understood perfectly what he meant. Slowly, Hyunjae knelt before her, the powerful CEO who never bowed to anyone, now on his knees, his eyes raised to meet hers. Machine translated by Google. Park Yunha, I don't want you to be my bride anymore, he declared, his clear voice filling the silent hall. I want you to be my wife. Not by contract, not by business, not by convenience, but because, in a world where everything has a price, your love was the one thing I could never buy, only deserve. From his pocket he removed a small box, revealing a delicate ring with a navy blue stone. The color of the stained sheet that brought us together, he explained with a smile few had ever witnessed. The symbol of the moment a laundry worker taught humility to the most arrogant man in Busan. Yunha felt her heart almost burst in her chest, her vision blurred with tears. You planned this perfectly, as always, she commented, her voice cracking. Not really, Hyunjae admitted, something new shining in his eyes, genuine vulnerability. I'm completely improvising, for the first time in my life. They say that's how love works. A bright smile spread across Yunha's face as she held out her hand for him to slide the ring onto her finger. Yes, he replied simply. Yes to whatever comes, planned or not. When Hyunjae stood and took her in his arms, the hall erupted, in applause. In the center of the circle of young scholarship recipients illuminated by the soft glow of lanterns, they kissed. Not as CEO and assistant, not as savior and savior, not as mentor and protege, but as equals, bound together, not by circumstance or agreement, but by deliberate choice and hard-won love. And so, under the warm lights of a hall filled with stories transformed by education, the laundry girl and the heir to the hotel empire sealed a contract that no lawyer could ever draft. A commitment written not on letterhead, but in the invisible and powerful space between two hearts that had learned to value what is truly priceless.